Welcome to Rehash, a Web3 podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Rehash, a Web3 podcast. I'm your host, Diana Chen, and in this episode, we are talking all about regenerative crypto, solarpunks, Gen Z and Web3, and much more with Gary Sheng, co-founder of Civics Unplugged and DreamDAO, two really cool projects that I'm really excited to dive into with you. Welcome, Gary. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks so much, Diana. Really excited to be here and good to see you again.
Good to see you too. Before we dive into DreamDAO and Civics Unplugged, can you tell people who aren't familiar with your background a little bit of what you were doing before Web3 and how you initially came to understand about crypto and Web3 and dive into this world?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's helpful to know that the first 22-ish years of my life were kind of blindly climbing ladders, social ladder, academic ladder, career ladder, trying to get into a good high school, then get into good college, get good internships. People told me to do computer science, so I did computer science. I was lucky to have gotten a full-time job at Google. That job was located in New York City, where I had kind of two priorities, which was go to and host cool parties and get promoted. And I was like pretty good at both for some reason. And then Trump got elected, which showed me that America was a lot less stable. And not just because of one person, right? But because of the whole dynamic, right? Of the election and everything that it unveiled, everything, all that it provoked in me, and just thinking about, oh, we have a lot of work to do. How I responded to that was pretty reactively, honestly. All that I saw that was change-making work was social media activism, which is kind of funny, but people emulate what they can see. And so I joined this social media activism group, and it turns out I was very good at that. Helped get 1 billion impressions in 2017, spending $0 because of why? Because of what kind of content does really well on social media. There was not that self-awareness at the time, but it was polarizing content and stuff that I'm still passionate about today, including police brutality, but just almost like the medium is the message. If Twitter and Facebook make it really easy to create unnuanced messaging that gets people in a really dark place. And the main reason why I stopped doing that form of change-making work was because my ex at the time told me I was not fun to be around anymore. So that sparked a lot of self-reflection. I cut out the online activism stuff cold turkey and started learning. So while I was at Google, by the way, just doing this all like on bathroom breaks and stuff, to be honest. And while I was still at Google, I spent a lot of time in 2018 just learning how the world worked. I became very concerned about democracy and also the breakdown of community in America, which is really what got me into networking in the civic and political space. Met my eventual co-founders of Civics Unplugged, which is a nonprofit dedicated to empowering Gen Z to be and build the future of their communities and democracies. We've trained 1,500 plus alumni across the US, but also we have representation in 70 plus countries. And the connection to Web3 is that I was lucky to have met one of the co-founders of Gitcoin, Scott, about 8 months ago in late summer of 2021, who was like, what you're doing outside of Web3 is really interesting and necessary. Have you thought about how Web3 could be a set of tools that could be relevant to making the world a better place? Honestly, I had not thought about that at all. I had a very bad impression of crypto, Web3. I had personally bought some Ethereum a few years back, but that was the extent of it. And I really did not know much, but Scott just seemed like a really great person, and he is a great person. And so after just a little bit of jamming and talking to my own team at Civics Unplugged, we were like, maybe we should launch a sub-initiative of our general civic innovators education work that we do that trains young people on how to do good in the world using this potentially very revolutionary technology.
Very cool. Yeah, Scott is a great person, and he'll be on this season of the podcast later on as well. So I think people who enjoy this episode will really enjoy Scott's episode as well, because we're talking about public goods and sort of related.
100%.
But that's super cool. So how did you go from meeting Scott and learning about Web3 for the first time to then creating Civics Unplugged and later on DreamDAO?
Well, so Civics Unplugged had already been around. Just to give you a rough timeline, I almost 3 years full time at doing Civics Unplugged, which is recently has something to do with training high schoolers to learn how to do Web3 only via DreamDAO, which is like powered by Civics Unplugged. It was a challenge to convince our board, which is still a very forward-thinking board, nonprofit board, but like Web3 does not have a good rap. If we did not have as forward-thinking of board members and a team that had personally been very interested and curious, and so one of my co-founders is actually someone that had been exploring blockchain for good since like 2018. Some people say it's too early, even in 2022, which is interesting. Or it's like it is early, right? In kind of a good way, we can shape how Web3 is used for good right now. But like, yeah, there's some people on our team and board that we're just like, like this is actually a really interesting opportunity because Web3 is so early that Gen Z could be the future of it, right? And it can shape the future, not just like learn Web3. It is such an interesting time because it is not set in stone what Web3 is, what the spirit of it is, and certainly the use cases related to social and environmental impact. Those are still very emergent and require a lot of imagination that young people kind of specialize in.
I want to dive into some of those concepts that you talked about. So DreamDAO, and now, sort of what Civics Unplugged has turned into too, is DreamDAO's mission is essentially to train and fund regen-minded Gen Z leaders around the world to explore Web3 and harness its power to build a solarpunk future. I think I just took that from either the website or the Twitter. That sounds like really cool and kind of straightforward, but also a little confusing at the same time to some people. So I want to break down some of just the words that you choose to include in the bio for DreamDAO. And the first is this concept of regenerative, this regen-minded, regenerative crypto. I think this is something that has been really coming to the forefront on crypto Twitter, and people have been hearing about it so much more. But I think a lot of people don't actually fully understand what this means and what this regen movement is all about. So can you maybe just start there and explain what this regen concept is all about?
Yeah, it's such a great question. The word regen is still an emergent thing that people are figuring out, but to me, it is the most powerful and unifying meme of our modern age. No pressure regen, but it perfectly meets the moment. The question that comes to my mind is, could there be something more pertinent to focus on than the regeneration of ourselves, our relationships with each other, our faith in humanity, our democracies, and our natural ecosystems? So it's not just limited to, for example, regenerating our soil or improving like water quality, which is very, very important. But it helps direct our attention to asking, how can we regenerate something that we personally really value, that matters to humanity's flourishing and the world's flourishing. So for some people, it could be restoring rainforests, right? For some people, it could be regenerating how our criminal legal system works, so it's more just. So I think I might have a broader view of what the potential of regen is and like the scope of it is.
Yeah, I think that's a great explanation. Could you maybe give some examples of where you have seen the intersection of regen and Web3 play out? Like, what are some examples of Web3 projects that work towards regenerating some aspect of our lives?
Yeah, for sure. So it's funny because I'm someone that is like a light contributor to Gitcoin, for example. I'm not paid by them, but I'm like their number one cheerleader. They're a supporter of DreamDAO, but I would say they are one of the most important regen impact DAOs that exist because they spread this sort of regen, good vibes, impact oriented culture. Gitcoin grants rounds, which happen like multiple times a year through quadratic funding, funnels like a lot of money from basically whale organizations into new entities that the Web3 community defines as public goods. To paraphrase a lot of what Kevin Owocki, one of the co-founders, wants Gitcoin to be, it's like a regenerative machine that allows for more regenerative machines to exist. So that's one of them. Another one is, or other kinds of regenerative oriented organizations are ones that like call themselves like regenerative finance. So it's different organizations that are trying to basically incentivize the alignment of financial returns with regenerating natural ecosystems, usually. I think the most low-hanging fruit way to do that is by leveling up carbon markets in different ways. I'm definitely not an expert in that. There was some news today that A16Z just invested in a lot of money into Flow Carbon, which has to do with putting carbon credits on chain, that sort of thing. There's a lot of reasons why that's actually useful for transparency and liquidity, different things I'm not an expert in, but there's a lot of wisdom behind merging blockchain with and tokenization with the carbon markets and just decentralizing that. Other regen Web3 projects, I think, so this is not one project, but you probably have noticed this as well, Diana. Web3 is kind of full of misfits and like beautifully talented misfits that did not feel fulfilled in the Web2 world and did not feel included necessarily, right? Like Web3, as you and I also know, has a long way to go in terms of representing the world that it is supposedly trying to support. But I've noticed that there's a lot of self-awareness about the importance of DEI in Web3. And I feel pretty strongly about Web3 being a really good sandbox for projects that bring a lot more diversity into the tech world in general. But like I hear a lot of talks about helping inner city kids go from like basically Web 1 or Web 0 because they've been so unsupported by people helping them onboard to tech in general to Web 1, 2, 3, right? Not just like learn how to set up a wallet, right? Because that's almost like kind of useless if you can't figure out how to like send emails and stuff. But like there's like a lot of passion of people that associate with the Web3 community in bringing people that have been left behind by Web2 into, I guess, like the modern world, and so that they can help build the modern, like the new world, which is part of the premise behind the creation of DreamDAO.
Yeah, definitely. I see that a lot too. I think there is a lot of passion in Web3 to use Web3 and crypto and blockchain technology to help people. But I think there's also some awareness, and this either I've seen this manifest in sort of optimism or sort of this like jaded view that while we talk so much about helping people with Web3, we haven't actually done that much.
For sure.
And in reality, this space almost feels like a bubble that's not part of reality, where you do still have to have a good amount of money to participate in the space, and it's really not made available to the majority of people, at least at this point.
No, and for me personally, I've learned so much about how hard it is to onboard people that don't feel already super comfortable with Web3. And even when, like, for example, we've been matching like these 15 to 20-year-olds that we serve to like really cool internships this summer, and some of them are really lamenting the fact that it is confusing to convert the stable coin that they're going to receive into their native currency, because they want to use it not just for like a pure crypto savings account, but to actually pay for books and food and just normal things that you could buy in a local area, right? So it's kind of like I'm of two simultaneous minds. I think that the potential of Web3 is enormous if we continue thinking about how we can use it as a tool for regenerating what we care about and bring more people on board. And then the other mind is that like, wow, we have such a long way to go to get to that place. And if we don't continue investing in on-ramps, and also as like product developers, as community builders, if we're not being brutally honest about what are the blockers of people getting involved, and which could be as simple as parents read something in the news and there's not really trusted materials that kind of counteract or give the full story about what Web3 is, right? And there's like tons of other impediments to people having the desire to and being able to onboard as well.
Yeah, and I want to dive into the people that you're actually helping and sort of the role that Gen Z play in the space in general. But before we move on to that, the other piece of DreamDAO's mission is to build a solarpunk future. Can you explain for anyone who is like, what does solarpunk mean? Like, what do you mean when you say solarpunk future?
Yeah, so solarpunk is another beautiful term that I don't know if any one person can claim like ownership of that meme, but to me, it's a world where humans and nature are living in harmony, and technology was used and is being used to support the ongoing sustained flourishing of both humans and the natural world. One kind of aspect of a solar pump future to me is, or a better future to me, is one where there are just more self-sustaining communities, where a conflict, let's say hypothetically in Eastern Europe, does not totally disrupt the lives of everyone in the world, right? We live in a time where a shock in one part of the system affects every part of the system. Let's take the bright side of it. It's like we are interconnected, and like there's like a self-interest in, because we're so interconnected, to not ruin things for other people because it comes back to us. But at the same time, we should also be investing in technologies that allow us to grow crops locally, right? And be also more reconnected with nature, to 3D print things that we need for our nutrition, to be able to not be so overly reliant on landfills, and just overall learn what it means to have like a zero waste circular economy. I think we're pretty far away from that, practically speaking, but part of why it's important to talk about what our future can look like and what it almost needs to look like in order for us to not be constantly worried about like a dictator like having a bad day, or more than that, right? Just having a vendetta against the world and that affecting the whole world. Is we need to just start building more resilience. We need to start building technologies and adopting practices that allow us to rely more on each other in a hyper-local way. And at the same time, enable hyper-local communities to share best practices and technologies that enable that resilience.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm curious too, like long term, what do you hope to see in the Web3 regen space that we haven't yet seen? So I think like right now, and you've talked a lot about this, as people are really focused on the environment, on climate, but like you said, regen is all encompassing in all aspects of our lives. Are there any projects or areas of regen that you would love to see, new projects be built out in the future?
Yeah, so there's two kinds of projects of many that I am personally focusing a lot of attention on. Number one, it's bioregional regeneration projects. So Regen Network has given a grant to this regenerative leader, Joe Brewer. I forget exactly where it is. I think it might be like Costa Rica or something, where he's like leading like a crew of people to regenerate a huge plot of land that has been, through human activity, has been like the soil has been detrimented and stuff like that. And part of why I'm interested in these like specific examples of actually regenerating like land is it gives us inspiration, right, to do that in our sort of local areas. And ultimately, we need like thousands, if not millions, of Joe Brewers like in the next 10, 20 years for us to get to a much healthier place in our planet and to sequester a lot more carbon and also just beautify the planet. So that's one. It's like regenerating local bioregions. Going along with that is we need a lot of really amazing storytelling around projects like that inspire a lot more people to do similar things and invest in similar things. Another thing that I'm really excited to focus on, talking to a few different people, some in Chicago, some in Oakland, and also some in New York, of how do we empower arguably some of the most marginalized or under-supported people, at least in terms of the results of what's been happening, like inner city kids, for example, in Chicago. How do we potentially leverage Web3 technologies, but more broadly, just empowering technologies to help them develop real agency where, yes, there's support early on, but eventually it's just like an upward spiral of agency where they form like hyperlocal DAO-like structures that are constantly improving their neighborhoods. And then, these like communities, these like these DAOs, right, basically are helping cultivate future leaders for those local areas. There's a lot to be figured out in regards to hyperlocal civic and like life empowerment of marginalized youth, but I can hardly think of something that's more important to demonstrate it's possible. And then again, right, similarly, if this works for like one neighborhood, how do we make this work for 1,000 neighborhoods 5-10 years from now? And part of why these projects are so valuable to me is because we need reminders that people can come together to help people realize their potential to make things better for themselves and the world.
Yeah, I love that. And I think, another thing that you've been talking about a lot is really just this Gen Z population that you're so passionate about helping. And I think for some people listening, it might be helpful for you to maybe explain a little bit like why it is that you're so focused on this Gen Z population and what is it about Gen Zers that makes them unique and maybe different from millennials or even older generations. And I'm also curious to hear if there's something that tends to attract Gen Z to Web3 that might be unique to that generation.
Yeah. So I think Gen Z has the potential to be the most impactful generation ever. It has echoes of a previously super impactful generation, which is the generation that sort of came to age in the 60s and 70s, or the 60s, like around the civil rights era. I think there's like an awakening, like a default awakening in consciousness of Gen Z, in part because millennials are kind of like a bridge generation to Gen Z, or like a mentor generation to Gen Z. And let me explain that, because we were kind of captured by the system. Like I'll speak for myself. When I was in college career fairs, I'm a younger millennial, I'm 29. And I'll speak from experience that career fairs were just dominated by these like super attractive, like big tech, big law, big, big banking, hedge fund type institutions. And I could not imagine anything else. Those are the only career paths that I could have seen. Right. And I also could not have seen any other educational path. I'm happy to admit, right, I did not pay for my college education. My parents did. They paid like over $250,000 for my Duke University education. And even though I didn't pay for that and I didn't have student loans, like I still felt like I needed to make enough money to make it worth that crazy high tuition. And generally, what kind of jobs pay you a lot of money right out of college? It's jobs that kind of reinforce and extract from the status quo, right? It's like Google is like built this like very helpful products in a lot of ways, right? But it is sort of rent seeking, right, on this existing status quo, this existing attention economy that has really helped get us where we are today in a lot of good ways, but a lot of bad ways. And a lot of the organizations that will move the needle most on building a much healthier future are ones that cannot compete with paying kids at the time it's probably like $40,000 for a summer internship for Google, right? Like how can you compete with that? Like college juniors are getting like $40,000 to work at Google for a summer. And so it's like, yeah, like of course I'm going to work at Google. And so why I think it's so important in order for Gen Z to realize potential to almost like intervene when they're in high school, and not and really just mainly intervene in a way that's like helping them to see the bigger picture of what's happening in the world, and like they can decide for themselves whether they feel comfortable working at McKinsey or Google or something like that. And sure, there's useful things that can be done at Google that make the world better, right? But if you really want to move the needle on sparking like a regenerative renaissance, if I might be so bold to say, you got to have a different educational path. You got to have a different career path. And if you're not exposed to different career paths and just life paths at an early age, your default path is going to be taking on a lot of student debts and then seeking a job that allows you to pay off a student debt, and then trying to pursue like the American dream. And then just to kind of answer a little bit more about Gen Z, super socially and environmentally impact oriented, super interested in diversity and inclusion, super disillusioned with the status quo. Like that's like the perfect demographic for regen Web3, right? For Web3 in general, it's like people that are really tired of the status quo. It's like, oh, social impact minded, environmentally impact minded. Regen Web3 is like, that's their home, right? And I got protested by Civics Unplugged kids for even bringing up the idea of Civics Unplugged getting involved in crypto Web3, which is hilarious. And that's actually beautiful because it's like that kind of energy is necessary to push the space forward.
Yeah, 100%. I think I'm sold on the Gen Z population now. I'm all about Gen Z. I think those are all really good traits, and I'm excited to see more Gen Z in the space. So I want to talk about the DAO component. DreamDAO obviously is a DAO. Why did you decide to organize DreamDAO as a DAO instead of something else like Civics Unplugged? Like, I love to know like the behind the scenes organizational thought that went into that.
So there's kind of like two rough ways that you could educate someone on Web3. It's like, here's a book on Web3, right? But it's kind of like a archetype of like, okay, you can watch lectures, you can read books, right? You can learn about Web3, or you can be in Web3, learning about Web3, right? So the beautiful thing about DreamDAO is we're empowering Gen Z to build the machine that is empowering them to be in Web3 and explore Web3 and contribute to Web3. So they help lead all the working groups within DreamDAO. They help think of what trips we should take, which events we should host, what guests do we invite to do learning sessions with us. They've learned a lot about governance and how hard and nuances between centralization and decentralization, progressive decentralization, the pros and cons of having too many DAO tools or not having a tool for something. There's so many things that they've learned since we launched season 1, which is the beginning of January, and so now it's around end of May. So almost 5 months of learning a lot of beautiful and often hard lessons about taking initiative and power and responsibility and centralization, decentralization, all these different things, and partnerships with different DAOs. Like, so they're helping identify DAO partnerships. There's no question, right? In retrospect, there's no question that we should have launched a DAO to train and onboard and prepare Gen Z to contribute to the broader regen Web3 ecosystem. And I wrote this the other day as like sort of a memo to the community. Your goal should not be to like be stuck to DreamDAO, right? DreamDAO is like a springboard, right, to like other initiatives that maybe like a small percentage will be like, consistently in DreamDAO. But like we have failed if the vast majority of our young members are still that DreamDAO is still their main DAO. Like I want them to be taking up leadership responsibilities at Gitcoin, Rabbit Hole, right? Mirror, the list goes on in 12 months.
Yeah, 100%. So when you look for these high school students or Gen Zs who apply to be in DreamDAO, what are some concrete traits that you look for? Because I think there is an application process, right? So I assume
Yeah.
you look at these applications and then you
Yeah.
look for certain things. What do you look for in people who apply? And then also on the flip side, because you also work with leaders in Web3, what do you look for in the leaders or the mentors that you bring into DreamDAO?
It's a great question. I think number one, I think written applications are useful, but also very limited. The number one way to know if you want to work with someone or support them is by seeing them in action for a little bit. Most of the applicants and eventual members of the first season of DreamDAO are people that went through our Civics Unplugged Civic Innovators Fellowship, which is like the main way that we attract Gen Z in general, beyond whether they're interested in Web3 or not. And that has 1,500 plus alumni from 4 cohorts of that program. And then that's the main source of Gen Zers that are thinking about DreamDAO. Yeah, we pay attention to how well they play with each other, right, in digital spaces, whether they can help facilitate meetings, whether they are nice in our Civics Unplugged Discord, which used to be a Slack, and whether if we match them with a internship opportunity, for example, did they do good in the internship? So a lot of it is kind of like cheating, where it's just like, hey, like we know you'll be good in another community if you've been good in the previous community, right? But for the small percentage of Gen Zers that were not part of the Civic Innovators Fellowship of Civics Unplugged, I guess this is just like something that I've had to develop, right? Intuition, just reflecting on the past experiences of a Gen Z applicant. Like, have they proven that online and or offline, do they love community? Do they like contributing to it? I think community spirit is by far the number one characteristic, because it kind of tests for a lot of different things. If you're a really unpleasant person that is just hard to work with and ungrateful, or any number of qualities that would not allow you to succeed or just to be an appreciated member of a community, you're probably not going to spend that much time contributing to community. So it's like usually a good indicator if they've done community related work in the past.
Yeah, and from your view, what are some strategies that you found to be really effective in building online community? Because it's I think something that's a lot harder than it sounds. Like, I think interpersonal relationships are tough to begin with, and then when you add that digital layer onto it, a lot can get lost in translation when you're texting somebody or messaging someone on Discord. I mean, even tweeting. That's why there's so much like hate and angst on Twitter, I think, is just misinterpretation.
Wow. That's something I think a lot about, like what is lost in communication because of communication mediums, and also just different ways that people prefer to communicate that they may not be self-aware are interpreted in a different way. So part of why I'm like at this point of like talking in a way that uses a lot of emojis, and like some people gave me shit for this 3 years ago, or some people still today give me some shit for it. But like Gen Z, if you have a sentence that has a capital letter and you have a period at the end, they assume that you're pissed at them. And again, I'm generalizing across the generation, of course, right? But like even and me as well, right? Like if someone that doesn't normally add a period to at the end of the sentences adds a period, I'm like, well, what did I do? But like if you have like a non-sarcastic like smiley face or like a heart emoji, right? Like I'm gonna assume that you're not mad at me, right? Like, and so that's just one of many things to keep in mind if you're working with younger people. And FaceTime is just so important, whether it's one-on-ones, group hangouts. So something that we really dropped the ball on in the first few months of DreamDAO's season 1, what we got right in the second half so far, is group DAO-wide hangouts / jamouts, jams that we call jamouts. So previously, people were just meeting in working groups, which was like literally creating silos. And I also wasn't getting as much FaceTime with everyone as I wanted to, because I couldn't go to every single working group meeting. And often people that are not part of a working group want to weigh in occasionally on things that may be in the purview of a particular working group. So we've just started to do a lot more DAO-wide design sessions, hangouts, game sort of nights, and it's been so helpful. And it's not hard, and it's ideally it's fun because you like being around the people that you decided to be part of community with. Like, I really could not overemphasize the importance of like quality FaceTime, where it's, for example, like our community is like really small. We only have 40 kids, 40 Gen Zers in our community. We have like 40 mentors as well, but we kept it really small because we wanted people to actually get to know each other. When you don't create these like convenings that enable people to know each other, and you just rely on Discord, people go insane because Discord is or just to not put too much blame on Discord, it's like a million chat streams is like makes you go crazy. But like having like a DAO-wide event where it's like, oh, everyone's a human, it's like you're reminded that people have good intentions and want to help you, and can be funny and like warm and all these things that actually it can be easy to forget if you're just doing work all the time. You're just leaving comments on Notion docs all the time. You're just talking about deadlines all the time. It can really decay the health of a community. That's just my experience.
Yeah, I think those are really insightful findings from the community. I think those are some of the things that I've been learning as well going through. I think, coming from more of a just traditional old-fashioned corporate background, you think that meetings are just for getting things done. Let's keep meetings as short as possible, minimum amount of time. And I think we really miss that human component, that connection component of like, let's just hang out and like play some games, or, like shoot the shit and just get to know each other and become friends, so that we're two humans working together and not just like two strangers who don't care about each other trying to get something done. So I really like that. Last question for you, Gary, and this is kind of more of a personal one, is on your pinned thread on your Twitter, which is kind of like a get to know me thread. One thing that you have on there is you wrote, optimism is self-fulfilling if tied to collective action. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Yes. So a few things come to mind when I think of that quote. If you're hopeful about your future and you're super self-obsessed, you should have less hope for your future. But if you're optimistic about your own future and humanity's collective future, or your community's future, and you are doing a lot to help other people, especially help other people that are helping other people and are interested in working together and coordinating, which reminds me a lot of like my favorite people in Web3. I think our optimism is not naive. It's not ungrounded, because, history is just, what is history except a bunch of examples of like a constant stream of examples of the good that can come from people coordinating over an extended period of time very thoughtfully, right? So if we look at the civil rights movement, that wasn't, the worst take is it's one charismatic guy, MLK, who made a great speech once, right? The accurate take is that like it was like thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people that were kind of moving the needle little bit by little bit every year, and increasingly coordinated to allow for something like the Civil Rights Act to be passed. The same goes for, any sort of collective success that didn't get overturned right away. It was this intentional building of trust across networks of networks that enabled amazing things to happen that no individual could even conceive of doing on their own. So to me, I just feel more and more optimistic every day that I see like the meme of coordination becoming more popular. The meme, I get more optimistic when I see that community is getting cooler and just more sexy because of DAOs. I get more optimistic when I see things like DAO Camp exist, which was hosted by the wonderful people at Cabin DAO and Groundwork, which is a collective of DAO leaders.
Yeah, I love that. I love that explanation. It really, I just love that concept overall, and hopefully more people can, adopt that same sort of mentality, because I do think that we can get a lot more done and we can do a lot more good for the world when we have that mentality.
100%.
Gary, this was so great. Thank you for all your insights. To kind of wrap us up here, let's play a quick little game and do something a little more lighthearted and fun. What do you say?
Let's do it.
All right, cool. So the game is called This or That. I'm going to say 2 words, like A or B, and you just tell me which one you prefer. No explanation needed or anything like that. I've got 10 pairs of words, so we'll just blow through this super quick.
Okay,
all right?
great.
Okay, so first one, Bitcoin or Ethereum?
Ethereum.
Crypto or Web3?
That was easy. Web3.
Oh, it might get harder. DAOs or NFTs?
DAOs.
Bear market or bull market?
Oh, I like this. So bear markets are really grounding, so I'll just go with bear.
Okay, cool. Learning or teaching?
It's 2 sides of the same coin. Learning.
Okay. Books or podcasts?
Podcasts.
Gen Z or millennials?
Gen Z.
Past or future?
Future.
Dogs or cats?
Cats. I think I'm going to get a cat when I get older, honestly.
Nice. Okay, last one. Earth or space?
Earth, so we can justify going to space more.
Oh, nice. Cool. All right. Well, congrats. You finished the game. Thanks again so much for taking the time to come on the podcast. And then before you go, last thing, tell people where they can find you if they want to follow you or get in touch. And then where can people go to learn more about DreamDAO and Civics Unplugged?
Yeah, so I think the one-stop shop is just heading to my Twitter at Gary Sheng, GarySheng. And there's like a lot of different links to the different things that I'm up to, including DreamDAO and Civics Unplugged. But Diana, I just want to say thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited about what you're building. And speaking of collective action, how you're making this like a community endeavor to make this podcast a success, right? It gives you more reason to be optimistic, right? Because you have a community that is invested in the future of it. So.
Thank you so much, Gary. Thanks so much for saying that. I'm really glad you were nominated and voted on as a guest this season. Mm-hmm. I'm really excited for the lineup, and I think the lineup that we ended up with is really just a testament to the strength of the community,
for sure,
and how values align the community really is. Yep. So I'm really excited. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you everybody for tuning in, and we'll be back again soon with another episode of Rehash.
Yeah.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Rehash, a Web3 podcast. The guest from this episode, Gary Sheng, was nominated by Louis and voted onto the podcast by Julia, Triumph, Andrew, tylerinternet, and elliedots. Some of the questions you heard were submitted by Carsten, Zayi, and Louis. Rehash is hosted by Diana Chen, produced and edited by elliedots and tylerinternet, and as always, supported by Rehash DAO. To stay up to date on all things Rehash, you can follow us on Twitter at RehashWeb3 and join our Discord to get involved.